Hello and welcome to Arvada's Centennial Celebration. I'm Charlie Alt. From its early days, Arvada has always been at the crossroads of our great country. Our community has attracted people over the years for many different reasons. But whatever that reason was, one thing is sure. Throughout the years, getting here and getting around here has always been a unique experience.
Trails, tracks, and thoroughfares. They're chapters in the story of transportation, but they also define Arvada's development in so many ways. These days, ribbons of roads and streets crisscross our neighborhoods. Air-conditioned cars and buses connect us to almost any place we want to go. But a mere 150 years ago, this kind of travel was unimaginable. Back then, getting anywhere was truly a journey. Sometimes muddy, sometimes dusty trails led the way to the land that would become Arvada. They were the highways of the 1850s and 60s. Arvada's first families, the Wadsworths, the Renos, the Swadleys, like other westward pioneers, planned their travels carefully and faced many tiresome days along the Westward Trails.
It can be plenty hot and long and tedious, and if you have a well-trained team, I mean, if on a wagon like this, you'd have been walking along with the oxen rather than driving. But if you were driving, you could sit up here, and that would be better than walking alongside of them. But you're lucky to do 10 miles a day. Take you a long time to do the 700 miles from Kansas City to Denver in one of these things, a couple of months. The good advice would be travel as light as you think you can. Most people didn't follow that advice. They took as much as they thought they could.
Still, prized family possessions often had to be left behind. Food was a priority. The wagon had to carry enough food not only for months on the trail, but also enough to sustain the settlers for some time once they arrived. Trails ran along near water, essential for survival, yet sometimes deadly.
They didn't know what disease was caused by, and there was a lot of waterborne disease, cholera and dysentery, and they didn't realize that was due to bad water. If you had an animal that died, that's when you had to start unloading your wagon. But most of the people who actually came to Colorado made it here with what they started with, as long as they took care of their animals.
But what they started with provided only a stark existence. Expanding the frontier meant using the trails to move cargo, not just families. Enterprising pioneers drove large Conestoga wagons, like the one Jim uses, to move goods the settlers would need but couldn't fit into their smaller wagons. Conestogas were also called prairie schooners, because with their bowed canvas coverings, they resembled ships on the ocean.
Prairie schooners were freight wagons, just like today's 18-wheelers. Before the railroads came, they hauled all of the freight on the frontier. Whatever people need for sustenance, so it would be hardware, mining equipment, clothing, bolt goods, whiskey, you name it. If it was manufactured, it would get shipped this way.
For our city's early pioneers and founders, trails took tenacity and sacrifice, but gave hope for a new beginning in a town they would call Arvada. Tracks brought the Iron Horse to town in 1870, and with it, not only a new way of getting here, but a new era of doing business, and soon, a new way of getting around. In the coming decades, numerous competing rail lines came and went, connecting Arvada to the nation and replacing the Conestoga as the workhorse of commercial haulers. And while it was the search for gold that initially spurred rail lines around Arvada, it was the discovery of coal that laid tracks to another interesting chapter in our city's transportation history. The Leiden Mine, a rich vein of coal lying deep underground northwest of Arvada, was named for two brothers who first mined coal there in 1869. Tragically, both men died by 1870. But in 1902, new operators of the mine worked it around the clock, extracting 1,000 tons of coal per day. At the same time, the Denver Tramway Company, in need of coal to operate its growing interurban trolley service, laid tracks that would revolutionize how Arvadans connected with other cities, and also enabled the Tramway Company to transport coal and 200 miners to and from the remote Leiden mine site. The tramway service to Arvada began with a controversial cut under the Colorado and Southern rail lines in 1902. Its completion enabled Arvadans to get around with much greater ease than before. Longtime Arvadan Jane Gardner recalls taking the trolley to high school in Golden.
It was fun. There were other kids too taking the trolley. They let them off at different places along the way, and we just had to be there on time. The trolley left on a certain time, and you could, if you missed it, that was another hour.
The post-war boom years of the 1950s ended the era of the trolley for Arvada, as the era of two-car families and thoroughfares soon replaced tracks as a favorite way of getting around. As early as 1914, a good number of Arvadans already owned automobiles and looked for opportunities to show off, such as the time Ford agent A.L. Davis invited Ford owners to take a picture in front of his garage over on Grandview Avenue. While car ownership was increasing, roads to drive them on were still in the works. Dirt and gravel roads dominated our thoroughfares. But in 1925, the first all-concrete road from Arvada to Denver was completed. It was a stretch of Grandview between Wadsworth and present-day Teller Streets. Arvada's Chamber of Commerce planned a huge celebration for October 17th in honor of the new link, including the town's very first Harvest Festival. Even the Colorado governor was invited to attend. But the night before the grand opening, a huge snowstorm hit the area. Undaunted, citizens and businessmen cleaned off the street and carried on as much of the celebration as they could. In the decades since 1925, roads winding through our expanding neighborhoods and thoroughfares connecting Arvada with other cities have necessarily grown with our population. Where trails used to lead to our community, superhighways now point the way, and trucks carry much of the commerce that Conestogas and railroads once carried over trails or rails.
People don't like trucks on the highways because they're big and they take up a lot of room. But I'll tell you, we have to have them. We wouldn't have groceries, we wouldn't have clothing, we wouldn't have medical supplies. So we need roads that'll take care of our everyday needs. We don't look at it that way because we go to the store and we expect food there. We go to purchase clothing and we expect clothes to be there. So it doesn't just magically happen. It's trucked there, it's manufactured elsewhere and trucked into your community.
As Arvada celebrates 100 years of incorporation, the transportation issues it faces are entwined with those of many other communities we share our roads and highways with.
Wadsworth is a huge arterial, but it's also very, very congested. So we have to look at ways to solve those transportation issues now without making the roads wider and wider and wider. How wide do you want I-25? How wide do you want I-70? Those are the issues that are facing us right now.
While regional transportation planners try to define what our roads and highways will look like in the year 2030, we can only imagine that Arvada's early pioneers, crossing the plains at 10 miles a day, probably never dreamed of the lightning speeds and relative comfort we share today.
Throughout time, transportation has played a big role in the shaping of our communities. In fact, one of the reasons that Arvada was formed was because the railroad went right past here. But trains bring more than people. They bring businesses too. One of Arvada's most famous landmark businesses still stands right next to the rail line here in Old Town Arvada.
The Arvada flour mill took its place next to the railroad tracks in 1925. 4 stories tall, it was filled with marvelous machines that rumbled and wobbled and pulsed with a rhythm and a purpose all their own. Day by day, they churned and rolled wheatberry from local farms into flour that would go to market by rail. The mill was a symbol of how productive industrialized agriculture had become across the nation and around our town. But it also reflected one man's fascination with modernization, his passion for the milling business, and his understanding of what being next to the railroad could do for his business. Even as a young boy, Eugene Emery Benjamin liked to know how things worked. He practiced taking things apart and putting them together again. As a high schooler, he often stopped in at the rock flour mill on his way home from school in Golden. There, he studied the machines and secrets of flour milling. After high school, he continued to work in flour mills and to study the craft he loved so much. In 1925, he'd found happiness in his marriage to the beautiful Maggie Mae Wells of Denver, but he was still searching for the perfect place to build his own flour mill. He found it that year in Arvada. On September 14, 1925, he took his idea to the Arvada Chamber of Commerce just to get their goodwill. And within days, Eugene Benjamin convinced the Colorado and Southern Railroad to lease him an area 200 by 40 feet right next to the tracks for $48 a year. His dream of owning a great mill began to take shape.
He began to dig a basement, and he got some of the friends in Arvada to help dig this basement. And then he put out the story that his wife's chickens had been pecking around in the place where they were doing this excavating. And Maggie Mae had found a gold nugget in the wallet of one of the chickens when she prepared it for Sunday dinner. All of a sudden, he had more people helping him dig the basement than he knew what to do with. And he did get that finished up. And then he began to build the walls. He and Bert Wales basically built the mill. And when you're in the mill, you can look up and you can see the marks of the chisels and the saws.
The mill was finished the following year, and Eugene Benjamin held a contest to name his new flour. Arva Pride was the name dreamed up by Mrs. V.B. McCashin. She won $25 for it. The mill went into production in 1926, putting out 200 pounds of flour per hour. Benjamin advertised his product in the Arvada Enterprise, writing up clever articles full of humor. At that time, flour sold for $1 for 24 pounds.
He was doing very, very well. He built 2 huge silos in 1929, just in time for the stock market crash and for the beginnings of the drought.
With the Dust Bowl days, the stock market crash, and competition from bigger mills, Benjamin's business began to suffer, and so too did his health. He had developed lung disease, common to millers of the time. On May 1, 1944, Eugene Benjamin sold his beloved mill to another well-known Arvada family. Arvada's mill builder died just 10 days later on May 11, 1944. But his mill continued to serve the community for many years to come. Owned at the time by the Tiller family, a limited amount of flour milling was still done there. But more and more, it was used for storage as the Tiller family changed their business to suit the times. In 1972, at about the same time the Arvada Historical Society was formed, the Tiller family began negotiations for donating the mill to the society. The building was placed on the National Register of Historic Places on April 24, 1975. Today, visitors are delighted to experience the warmth and magic of the old flour mill through historic tours.
This is a scale over here, the old Fairbanks scale, that they weighed in when they come. When they bring a load of wheat in, they'd bring it in here, they'd go down to the far end, and there was a hoist down there that would kind of lift the front end of the truck up, and it would go out the grain box. Then they would drive back around again, reweigh the truck to get the product, the amount of wheat they brought in.
Raven recalls around age 16, working for farmers and bringing a load of wheat to the mill. Now he gives tours of the mill because he says it's important for us to know where our food comes from and to preserve this part of Arvada's heritage. Like the mill's builder, Raven is fascinated with the machines that did the hard work. He patiently explains how the wheat was cleaned and soaked, then moved up and down through bucket elevators and chutes, and back and forth by augers. Each machine along the way played an important part in the process.
This machine here is a Eureka scour. It cleans the wheat berry, and it also takes and cleans makes sure there's no metal in the there, because the drum is metal. And when this come out of the cleaning machine, they had some magnets up here like this, and it would pick up any barbed wire or nails that happened to be in the wheat before it would hit this wheat drum right here. This is an old wooden auger that's in the bottom of this down here. You can really see it on the other side, Mark. These tabs are made like this to go this way, and then when they wanted to put it in reverse, they had to pull out the tab and put it in the opposite direction and put it in a hole this way. It would go, the reel would turn the same way, but it would be moving the product back out again. This is the third reel machine here. Now, I mean, this is what this machine here does, and it's made of silk. A real fine silk that sifts the flour through, and it goes through here, and then after it leaves here, it goes down through this bin down here, which is in the sacking room down there. See, we were upstairs there where the flour bin is, and this is a flour bin here, and when it come down there, and then the foot feed is down below there where they had to press it down to release the flour. And then on the top shelf up there, you'll notice all the different printed flour sacks that was the types that the housewife used. The flour sack was a very amazing deal because they were printed sacks. Women would look for these different printed sacks because that's what they used to make their dresses, their bonnets out of, the blouses, and different clothing.
One of the last stops on our tour is downstairs, where the story of Mrs. Benjamin's chickens finding gold was hatched, and where the power for the whole mill used to be.
And right here is the main powered machine. Here's a picture of it with Mr. Tiller standing on it. This is what run the whole mill operation. This was the exhaust system that went out of it. And right here, this is the belt that run this machine right here and come through this machine. And when it got started in the dust, it was a noisy place to work.
The dusty nature of the mill made it an unhealthy place to work, and the risk of fire in such a dusty place was always a danger. But it was a place ahead of its time when built. One man's vision for putting modern machines and ideas to work, together with the nation's rail system to move his product to market. The old flour mill stands proudly next to the railroad today, a reminder of Arvada's heritage of progress through transportation.
With the invention of the automobile in the 1890s, the transportation landscape revolutionized. Trains continued to go past our town and weave its way through it, but trails became thoroughfares and multiplied almost daily. Before long, it seemed like there was a gas station and a car dealership on every corner.
Americans and their cars. It seemed to be a love story of sorts right from the start, and Arvadans joined in the romance. The timing couldn't have been better. Our town's 1904 incorporation came right after the Ford Motor Company was established in 1903. A decade later, Henry Ford's assembly line production of the automobile made car ownership more accessible to all, and Arvadans joined the nation in the car craze. Some called it Auto Row. It was the stretch of Old Wadsworth between Ralston and Grandview where auto showrooms and garages once dominated Old Town. Around the corner on Grandview, other dealerships flourished too. R.O. Graves and A.L. Davis grabbed the opportunity to become Ford agents in those early years, while many other Arvada families dabbled in Chevys, are names that have since faded into history.
But doing some research, we found that there were like 8 different automobiles sold in Old Town between Grandview and Old Wadsworth. Ford and Chevrolet were common, but Dodge, some others are not as common, like Star and Durant and the Essex, and then the Hudson Terraplane. Not too many people heard of Terraplanes, and the Kaiser Fraser.
Car brands may have traveled on, but the buildings they once occupied still stand in Old Town. The Old Town Pick and Parlor on Grandview was once the home of R.O. Graves' thriving Ford dealership. Ironically, inside, the walls bear reminders that the Graves family started out in blacksmithing before it moved on to horseless carriages.
It was actually both sides were open with a doorway between the two. The showroom was where Old Town Pick and Parlor is, and the service area was where Dino is now.
At the corner, and stretching north on Wadsworth, the A.L. Davis building carried another Ford dealership, where Davis once invited Ford owners to line up in front for a grand photo opportunity. Eye-catching ads by competing companies often appeared in the Arvada enterprise, touting the economical prices of the practical man's car or payment plans as low as $5 a week. By that time, families already relied on cars for transportation, and fond memories of his dad's days in the auto business are cherished by Bill Ashton.
I grew up in Old Town in the 30s and 40s, and my dad was a Chevrolet dealer from 1920 until 1940. But as I was growing up, it was fun to go down to the depot there at what's now Webster and Grandview, where the cars came in 4 in a boxcar, and they had to unload them from there. And it was kind of a thrill for us because get that new car smell, and that was kind of special to remember.
Ashton's family story demonstrates the rapid changes in car dealers in Old Town in those years. His dad, Ralph Ashton, first opened up shop on Grandview in 1920, but moved to the west side of Old Wadsworth in 1922.
And then in 1932 and 33, he built a new building at the corner of Grant and Old Wadsworth, where currently La Dolce Vita is. Where their coffee shop is used to be the showroom for the cars, and where the individual stores were down the street where the grease rack and the auto service and the wash rack, and as well as the paint and body shop were close to the alley there.
Ashton Motors operated through the Depression years, and Bill's dad tells of hard times and creative financing.
We built the building in 1932 and 33, original one, and because financing was not available at the First National Bank, he had to go to a private party and end up getting gold coins for the construction of the building, and that's where the rest of the building got its name of the gold coin. He also told stories of people would bring their cars in for service and didn't have much money to pay, so they'd bring in chickens and other produce in lieu of cash, so they got in-kind payments for a lot of their work.
But depression or not, cars were here to stay, and all through Old Town, from about 1915 to 1950, ownership of car dealers often changed hands, with bigger and fancier showrooms being built through the years. Most also sported a garage for repairs, while other businesses peddled car parts, tires, or other gadgets. It's hard to walk through Old Town today without finding a building touched by the saga of cars in Arvada. It seems like the car craze really took off after World War II. Ashton Motors was destined to become Craig Frederick Chevrolet after the war, and it continued to grow with the community.
And he sold in 1940 to a man out of Kansas City by the name of Lou North, who had it for a couple years, and then Craig Frederick bought it from Mr. North, and they were still at the old building. And in 1946, Dad worked with Craig's to build a new building across on the north side of Grant Place. And then Craig's opened in February of 1947.
But all those cars needed gasoline, of course, and it seems that within a stone's throw of anywhere you looked in Old Town Arvada, there was a service station. The year was 1921. Grandview Avenue, the scene of many firsts in Arvada, was about to see yet another one. The U.S. Filling Station Company built the town's first service station on the northwest corner of Grandview Avenue and Wadsworth that year. It was reportedly celebrated as a great improvement to Arvada's business district, with its manicured and well-lit appearance. The station stood next to the old Reno home. While up the street on Wadsworth, the old Farmer's Grange Hall, which is today's Festival Playhouse, was clearly visible. 2 years later, the Continental Oil Company bought out that filling station. It was a time when uniformed attendants gave full service to their motoring customers. For the next few decades, service stations, like automobile agents, popped up everywhere and changed hands frequently in Arvada. On the southwest corner of Old Wadsworth and Ralston, early birds enjoy breakfast at the Eggshell today, but in the 1930s, it was the site of the Bearcat, a popular service station once owned by longtime Arvada resident Bill Shackley. Shackley, like other prominent Arvadans, owned many stations around town over the years. Don Phelan, standing in front of his dad's service station at Grandview and Yukon in the 1940s, went on to serve on the Arvada City Council and become mayor of Arvada in the 1970s. His dad, Red Phelan, owned the station, which was also owned by Skelly Oil at various times in history. Service stations pumped the economy of Arvada through the 20s, 30s, 40s, and beyond. Only a few nostalgic remnants of those old-style service stations still stand anywhere in our nation these days, but their history is a reflection of an era that saw the increasing urbanization of America and our town. And as Arvada celebrates 100 years of incorporation, America's car craze is still with us, less visible in some ways, but more in others, and continues to drive Arvada's modern transportation scenes.
As the countdown continues to Arvada's centennial celebration, I hope that you will continue to watch as we explore much more of our history. In the coming months, we will highlight our social clubs, schools, and more. I'm Charlie Alt. Thanks for watching.